I feel at a very deep archetypical level, humanity is lost right now. We're no longer capable of dealing with what is happening and unfolding at this stage. And I think we're not even acknowledging that we are out of depth. Somebody just asking, saying, be ordinary. And it's taken me like, I'm still unpacking that statement. What is it to be ordinary and one with others and stop being special? Ecosystem is about tapping into natural intelligence that makes unexpected encounters also happen, that makes new alliances unfold.
But ecosystem leadership is taking it like a step beyond to say there may not be any immediate possibility, but there may be an immediate resonance.
If you're really committed to your vision and you want to see this happen, it's time to step up from just thinking about your org to saying, hey, what's the society we want? What's my piece in it? And who are the others who need to be there in this piece? The great thing about ecosystem leadership is not capital intensive because you're actually just coordinating and weaving, but its returns are exponential. I think time is required. We don't look at time as capital, but time is this flowing thing. And for ecosystem leadership, you need to give time away from, you need to take, and that is finite. It's not infinite. So you need to take time away from your org and maybe even yourself.
So it's a bunch of too many things that somebody needs to bring in their basket to be able to do ecosystem leadership. That's how it's landing right now.
I would put it the reverse way. It's not people need to bring in too many things. They need to relax their focus from being overly focused on one capital. The other things will come on their own.
What you're saying is coordination is also relatively lighter. It's easier, but it's also expansive at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think, and it's lighter, but it's more needed even more now because there's a limit to how much you can collaborate, but there's no limit to how far you can coordinate.
Namaste, my name is Kejal and I'm here today podcasting Abhishek. This podcast is to unpack what really is ecosystem leadership. Why are we in this conversation at this time? Why do we need to really understand a new form of leadership? And we have Abhishek who's done the length and the breadth of the sector, from being in grassroots movements, supporting grassroots change, to being in international spaces, UN, being a facilitator, being an implementer, being an NGO runner, being a social entrepreneur of many different entities. So, inviting you in your whole form, Abhishek, here on this podcast, and happy to have this conversation.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Lovely. So, just to start off, Abhishek, this whole conversation and context around ecosystem leadership. Tell us why and how did you arrive at this? Why do we even need a different form of leadership?
No, I started my journey fairly early in school in the 90s when the Earth Summit happened in 92 in the first time and the Enron Dam was being built. I was a school student and a member of Cub Club and uh, looking at the world with a lot of hope that the world will definitely be a much better place and I'll contribute to it and all. And I was a lot into self-help. So the question was, how does personal change happen? So NLP, Deepak Chopra, Reiki. By the time I hit 10th standard and early college, the question moved into how can the society change? Because it it dawned on me that only changing myself is not enough. I don't want to be a successful person in a failed society. And really social transformation is the work, not just personal transformation. So I moved from what you call on the mat to off the mat fairly early and also realized the connection between the two, that there is a connection between the on the mat and off the mat worlds as well. As I explored, I first started with Rotract and the Blue Ribbon 1.0 and kept exploring with this question of what creates change. I joined some movements, looked at the left, Asia Social Forum, said, okay, maybe people's revolutions create change. They do, but a lot of that change rolls back. It doesn't last. There was a phase in 2010s when I thought United Nations will be the answer, and I spent time there, that maybe countries collaborating will create change. The part of the Sustainable Development Goal process, disappointment, and that didn't work either. Coming back to my own org and saying, okay, can we start building collectives, which is kind of the latest way of organizing people around one thematic area, not just organizations. Again, seeing that collectives are very still limited by their own sectors and their own causes, and therefore they do not cut it. So I think reaching ecosystem leadership is a series of disappointments. Disappointments in the sense, I guess there's an idealist within me who hopes that we find an answer which is for lasting change, which is comprehensive and brings forth a new vision for the society, which has a response to the meta crisis. So I think as I reflected, I said, oh, this is not enough. This is not enough. This is not enough. And the arena kept expanding. And I think ecosystem leadership for me is the most expansive form of leadership because it goes from deeply personal and interpersonal to organizational and beyond. It goes from hyper local and linking that all the way to what's happening globally. And it is across spectrums, right? It's across different worlds. So I think nothing less than that, nothing less than leadership at this level is what is needed to really impact something in the world.
Interesting. The depth and the breadth, definitely. Also, the question that you kept going back to what really is important and what really is necessary, and keep expanding the circle from local, global, and kept expanding it further.
Yeah, it's not only Kejal, just the depth which is inner to global and breadth across the spectrum. I think one thing that ecosystem leaders miss is the idea of time. The fact that there are ancestral generations and we are standing on the shoulders of giants, we have their blessings, and that we are accountable to the unborn future generations even more than plants and animals, which are among the most oppressed in the planet because they don't speak to us, are unborn generations because they're not even on the table. And we are cheating them through the financial system, through economic erosion. So, to me, an ecosystem leader needs to have a sense of time, needs to be in touch with ancestral wisdom and blessings, and needs to be accountable to the future generations that are yet to come. Right? So it's expansive on multiple fronts, not just in depth and breadth. It's temporally expansive also.
Almost sounds like the whole Yugdharma conversation, the ancestors before and the future that's going to come, and also the context of time in that expansive sense, not just the current time. Is that what you said?
Yes, and yes, and Yugdharma itself is sufficiently juicy, so I'm going to do a quick double click there also. That see, all of us have a swadharma, we have an innate tendency, we have certain prarabdha karma, we have certain ways we do things, a personality. And ecosystem leadership is about saying, hey, yes, you are this, but the times ask you to be something larger. And I think the times are asking all of us to be something larger. You could say, hey, you know what? I just care about civic. But then the Times will say, hey, that's not enough. You need to look at gender, caste, intersectionalities, climate. You can't sit back and say, no, my swadharma is my interest is just facilitation. But the Times are saying, hey, you can't just facilitate. You need to connect with policy. You need to connect with implementation, not do it. But Yug Dharma is the invitation to rise from our own self and preoccupation with self or deep investment in our tendencies of who we are to say what is needed of us. And very often, what is needed of us is not the same as who we are. For example, as a facilitator, who I am is a very harmonious person who likes to bring things in and integrate views. And yet, I feel my Yug Dharma is also taking my voice into the world. Hence, this podcast. Hence, me taking a stance, not just always facilitating. Right. So, I think Yug Dharma is what is building ecosystem leadership now today. Today's Yug Dharma is saying to us that do not stick to your organization alone. Do not think only in silos. Do not only think about your country, locality, or only the planet. Do not think only about your gender, caste, or religion. Expand, right? And to me, if you ask me, ecosystem leadership is our Yug Dharma. It is what we're being called to do, to
Hmm.
take responsibility of the whole, right? That's when it's Yug Dharma.
Do you want to expand a little more on why expand itself? And do you feel we are like too tiny, getting too kind of in our own little bubbles? And that's why the invitation to expand.
See, the invitation to expand is to everybody, but the expectation to expand is not to everybody, right? I think one has to look at expansion a little more closely. So when I'm triggered, upset, and angry, say with you, I can only think about myself and I'm going to kind of attack you, or I'm going to be very reduced and shrunk because I'm not feeling safe. Now, if I feel safe with you, I expand and you and I together can engage more deeply. But we may still feel, hey, wisdom tree is still not safe and there are other competitors and there are others in the sector. So we may still be shrunk at the identity of wisdom tree. Let's say wisdom tree is secure as an org and it collaborates across other orgs. It says, okay, there is competition, but there is possibility for collaboration. But we may get identified with the sector saying, hey, but we as a sector are getting oppressed or pushed. So again, we're not feeling safe as a sector. So you get stuck there. Then you say, hey, no, our sector needs to reinvent and play its role in the country. So you're like, but at a country level, you feel insecure that now it's a world where every country is for themselves. Right. And then you say, hey, no, but then there is a planet. So as we feel more secure, we expand more, right? Uh, that's the expansion from self to the larger context. Similarly, ideologically, when you go to one ideology but do not explore the other, you start getting convinced that your view is the view, which is not true at all. There are multiple views which need to negotiate to see contextually what is relevant. Right? No one view is comprehensive. So you expand across. If I feel insecure about, say, my Gandhian or center identity and say, no, no, I don't want to even talk to the right or the left. I think the Gandhian centrist view is the view. Then I'll never expand. But if I'm deeply rooted in my view, I will engage and I'll expand ideologically. Similarly, I'll expand if I believe only constructive work is great. I'll say, shit, these revolutionaries will not change anything. But if I feel secure, I'm like, how can my constructive work support activism? Right? So that's expansion. And similarly across time, right? If I think only about my generation and say, oh my God, and this is what the West does. The West says these are exceptional times, which is partly true. We're like, oh, it's our generation's challenge. But hey, yes, but there are ancestors who navigated difficult challenges also. And there are future generations coming, right? So for me, expansion is linked to safety, and expansion then is linked to thinking for the whole. When a cell only thinks about itself and starts multiplying, it causes cancer. But innately, the way the body is configured, there is a feedback loop where you naturally connect it to the whole, right? So to me, expansion is acknowledging a reality that there is already interconnectedness. ऐसा नहीं है कि artificially कोई fact, we're not creating a fact like a new theory. The truth is that we are connected. The truth is you and I are today here because of our ancestors' work. The truth is that future generations are coming on their way and asking us questions. So to me, expansion is acknowledgement of a truth that already exists. It is not a story or a belief. And there is no pressure. We don't have to push everybody saying, oh, expand your view. That's fine. All of us have to be honest to where we are. But I'm sure there are people who will have the space to expand. So we can keep making invitations saying, hey, feel safe, expand. Feel safe, expand. Right? And yeah, so that's kind of where expansion comes from. The invitation comes from.
I'm curious to ask you to share a few examples from your life that kind of pushed you.
I mean, the first example was when I was totally into self-help and wanted to make the best I could and wrote books on portrait of super student, became a topper in class and, all of that. And it was coming from a very kind of, make the most of myself kind of achievement hustle kind of a zone. And I think the first event I can think of is, uh, my father's friend inviting me to say that if you only think about yourself, is that going to create the society that we want to see? And I said, yeah, why not? If everybody thinks, tries to do their best, we'll have a great society. Then he said, no, but that's not enough to reinvent the society, right? And I think for me, that was one phase of expansion. I think encountering Vinoba Bhave was another phase of expansion. Vinoba talks a lot about connecting heart to heart, talking about Sangat, not just Sangh. Sangh is where I'm connected and I'm invested in my organizational boundaries, but Sangat is when we meet in space and time. So Vinoba's energy, Tagore at some stage also, when I was forever in guilt for living in cities and like feeling insecure and defending cities. But when Tagore wrote his essay City and Village, which is a must read, it said, hey, the two can be in harmony. So each time I think some wisdom has come to expand. I think my experiences in nature have also helped me expand, right? And I would that saying that you feel a connection to a tree, you feel a sense of expansion on a mountaintop. I remember on Triund, I could feel a connection to the whole world. That expansiveness makes you feel like you're a tiny part of a large planet, right? So I think some of those, and I would lastly say bipolar, right? My bipolar manic experiences have also pushed me out of our shared reality to see that our reality is a consensus, and that consensus can be changed for the better. And in bipolar, you get pushed out, so you again expand, right? And you're like, whoa, okay, this is just a slice of reality. There's lots going on. So yeah, I think life pushes us through experiences. If we process them well and translate them as invitations to expand, we do. If we don't, we regress. We become bitter, resentful, insecure, and petty almost.
And you can pass this also. If you feel like answering, you can also answer. Any honest confessions on, times which were very challenging to expand because expanding is not really easy. It takes a lot of you. It takes too many things from one person.
Yeah, I mean, expansion is not a permanent state, right? You keep going back and forth. Like just before this call, I had a difficult conversation and I felt very like defensive and very small. I could tell that right now because of that stress, I'm just busy defending myself, not looking at the big picture of what's going to happen. And then I have to ease into it and remind myself that that attack's not personal. It's not even an attack, it's feedback, but it shows up as attack because you shrink and you forget the larger context, right? So on a daily basis, one moves from expansion to shrinking. It's very human. None of us, I don't think any of us are saints who can always stay in an expansive state. And that's not even necessary. That's artificial, right? So we're always moving between, the irritation or the defensiveness. Even in arranging for this podcast, where you're correcting, saying, "Let's do this," I can feel a part of myself feel like, "Oh God," like I'm being signaled out and I'm being directed. So it's dynamic. But yeah, at the back of my mind, I have a sense that hey, we're in this evolutionary process, getting to participate in it, and that's the privilege, right? So it's not static one state that you get locked into. You keep moving and you hold it at the back.
Interesting. So, as we've delved now in the inside or the internally or internal experiences, also, how have you perceived the external environment changing? Because that also kind of may have shaped you. So, are there any external shifts that you see in the world in the timing that you mentioned that's going around that's really also influenced?
I think humanity as a whole is quite confused and lost. We may not say it, we may pretend that we know what's happening, how it's going, but like Yuval Harari says, for the first time in history, nobody can tell for sure what we're going to be 5 years from now. And things are going to change so radically, right? And each time, of course, when things change, we're like, oh, change is going to be radical, there is radical change. But some of these changes seem to be much more intense, and we're in the middle of one such thing. And so our ability to solve our problems is frankly not there. Our problems are complex, they're interconnected, they're accelerating, and they have already surpassed our collective ability to understand them. So we have no clue. Here we are like going after AI and researching, making technology available to everybody, surveillance on each other. So I feel at a very deep archetypical level, humanity is lost right now. We're no longer capable of dealing with what is happening and unfolding at this stage. And I think we're not even acknowledging that we are out of depth. We're busy pretending, and I think that's one problem, that the problem is beyond us. Second is this whole pretense, right? That all of us are busy pretending that we have our act together and everybody is signaling something. And since everybody is signaling what may not be true, we're like in this large game of mafia. Mafia is a game where you have to like hide whether you are a mafia or a villager. It's a fun game where you don't know who's lying and who's being honest. And right now we are in this such an explosion of information. It's very hard to tell what's really going on and what is right. What so so th- so there is problem is one issue, and then that has led to this blast of information and all of us signaling and a noisy space where we don't know what, and that is leading to, especially for Gen Z, an overwhelm, anxiety, mental health issues, and a feeling of lostness. And my prediction is it'll only intensify as the world speeds up. We're not prepared for that either, right? So times have changed in a large way, because we don't know. Even when we are fighting the independence struggle, we have a goal that India needs independence. What is our goal right now? It's just to survive and figure this thing out, right? So I think the world has changed very, very fundamentally, particularly with AI coming in. And while you may call it hype and so on, but things have changed fundamentally, and the change is too fast for us. So I think on that side, one thing has changed. At a sectoral level, I think we are realizing that no one org or not even one area is enough, because everything is interconnected. You solve your area, but another area comes in, right? And so we are realizing that it's not enough that we solve for our org or our domain. It's all interconnected. And as a sector also, I think we're realizing that it's not enough to be a sector that is holding checks and balances against the government or the market. We have to collaborate with the three sectors. It's no longer time to say, no, no, I'll stick to my ideology, because there is no time. The calling of the times is to come together. It has changed in that way that now it's a luxury to sit back and say, no, I am, from the social sector and the government is this, the business is this. Is all hands on deck kind of time, all collaborations, all solving it together, right? So it's changed in that way, which is a good thing, because then that pushes us to not be stuck to our views and actually, get our hands dirty and collaborate and start responding. So I think those have really shifted. It's harder to stay inner anchored. It's harder and harder to stay centered. It's harder and harder to relate deeply. Yeah. So a lot is changing as we speak.
From all that you shared, Abhishek, right now, what have been moments where some of these understanding really developed for you?
And this understanding tends to develop in small moments and incidents, I think. And for me, one definitely global events and conferences have been a big driver for me. Um, I remember, I mean, the image of Asia Social Forum 2004 was really alive for me. I know World Social Forum was 2004. Asia Social Forum 2002 was really alive for me in Hyderabad, where I saw all these social workers across orgs meet each other with so much love and connect. And that was the first time I felt I belonged to a sector and a movement. And I said, this is what I want in my life. I want to build lifelong relationships and friendships where even if we're working in our silos, when we meet with a lot of love and joy and so on. So I think that image, that collaboration and the solidarity and the love across, I think that stayed with me. And I said, this is what I want. These are goals, you know. And similarly, at the World Youth Conference, we were in Turkey, I think 2011 or 10, and you know, in the party, everybody is dancing, and you're like, okay, 70 different nationalities are dancing on music together in one large ground. And at that moment, I felt like, hey, we're just one planet, you know, we may have all these country tags and all, but like throw away your country tags because we're all young people alive right now. And just that dancing together with all those nationalities broke this idea of, because till then I was a delegate of my own country in the conference. But when that happened, I suddenly, that idea broke, you know, and we really kind of expanded to feel one planet. uh, I would say incidents and encounters with elders also have been very powerful. I remember in one of the gatherings, I was walking around with a very beautiful mala that they had put on all delegates. This was Gandhi Ashram, so Sood ki mala, that they had put, and I was feeling very proud as a delegate, and you know, walking around and all. And Arun Dada came, an elder, who I never thought he had noticed me, but I guess he had. And so he said, he tapped me and said, Abhishek ye mala utar do. तो आई सेड, अरुण दादा ये माला बहुत मेहनत से मिली है, मैं क्यों उतारूं, मुझे अच्छी लग रही है ये माला. अ, तो ही सेड कि तुम्हारा माला पहनने का वक्त खत्म हो चुका है. तो आई सेड, अभी तो माला मिली है, आप बोल रहे हो अभी यू नो ये माला छोड़ दो. तो he said, and I said, mala is special and I really want it. And he said, uh, विशेष होना गौण इच्छा है. It's a smaller wish to be special. जैसे तुम्हारा विशेष होने का वक्त खत्म हो गया, अब तुम साधारण बनो, साधारण बनना शुरू करो, है ना. And he walked away after that. And it was a very small incident in a way, somebody just asking, saying, be ordinary. And it's taken me, like, I'm still unpacking that statement. What is it to be ordinary and one with others and stop being special? It's such a small, like, encounter of like a 90-second encounter, but this was, I think, 15 years, 17 years ago. So an elder can also come and just remind you, right? I remember in Gandhi Ashram, somebody offered, and you were there, uh, saying, I'll show you something," and then he took us to the storage and showed us letters from Gandhiji, and that's when you realize you're a part of history. You're connected to that stream of thought, right? So elders, spontaneous incidents, conferences, all of those. Uh, of course, there's reading, YouTube videos. I think work of Daniel Schmattenberger, Nate Higgins, or Raghu with the Indic civilizational understanding that I could build. Mohan Bhai on Sarvanumati, Manish, Ashish, Arjun, all the elders. I think they've all been also points of expansion. So yeah, it's a journey. It's a journey of we expand. Lastly and most importantly, I think Suruchi for me would be my source of expansion, because I see myself as a galaxy. Every person is a galaxy. And just as, you know, our Milky Way hasn't yet reached Andromeda galaxy, I think I'm still in the process of reaching with my partner. Like, I feel like even two people getting each other deeply, coexisting. I think that expansion, that deep expansion of oneness, not just in small time, but like deep coming together. I think relationships are the place to practice that. So, as paradoxical as it sounds that you're talking about the world, but I'm saying it comes down into that one relationship, and that's what needs healing, I think. So, yeah, that also helps me understand where we are as humanity, how much we struggle to coexist.
You've been a believer of relationships. You wrote recently the book Relational Fields also. And ecosystem is also about many people, many interactions. How do you see relationships being critical in this whole process of ecosystem leadership?
And over time, I have just become more and more a believer in relationships, and this could totally be confirmation bias. But in my subjective experience, relationships not only give me joy, which I don't think that joy can be substituted by the joy of having a artificial intelligence friend or a pet. I think the human to human connection, which is not very smooth, it's rough but deeply intimate. I think it's mentally very nourishing. Even the studies they have done on people, what were their regrets? The regrets of dying. Top five regrets have two, three related to people only. I wish I would have spent more time with family. I wish I would have had more friends. So there's research also to say that in relationship we kind of thrive. I think the spiritual basis, like Krishnamurti have said, that you really discover yourself in relationship, and I really believe that on our own islands we're all saints, and the first point of interaction in your closest relationship, you realize that that is not true. There's so much about you that you're not aware of, and so much is unconscious. But more importantly, I mean, these are important. So I wouldn't say more importantly, I would say as importantly, what is happening in the world today in terms of the information explosion and what we call the epistemological crisis. We don't know what's true anymore. It is in the relationships that we come closer to truth, right? When we dialogue about something and when we kind of align on something, as मोहन भाई said कि उससे जो हम बनता है अध्ययन से उस हम की आवाज बहुत गहरी होती है और and today we need to listen to that deep voice that comes from the intersubjective space which gets built through deep relationships. Now, one could say, hey, there's a relationship between a contractor and a corporator also, and the contractor bribed the corporator to get him the contract. Isn't that also a relational field? That's a relational field. You could say India पूरा जुगाड़ society है, relationship से ही चलता है, it runs on relationships. So we're already a relational field. What are you talking about? And that's where I've tried to distinguish those kind of transactional relationships, which are called vyavhar, just transactional, to a much deeper sense of interbeing, right? Ekatva जिसे हम कहते हैं. And what the invitation is that we all need to deepen our relationships with each other, particularly ecosystem leaders, to understand and to let information and energy flow across us, right? And what I call the inner net, the deep relational field between us. When it is deep enough, new ideas come, and that's not just brainstorming, it is really sensing into what wants to be born. I think it's a very sacred process. And I feel that is the answer to us being lost. Us being in deep relationships is a prerequisite for answers to land. No one mind, no one person can show the way forward. It's only a collective, a sangha, and that happens through relationships. Uh, and apart from that sangha, I think for an ecosystem weaver, when I have judgments, when I have assumptions about you, I find it very hard to relate to you. That deep relationship doesn't get formed. We can posture and act with each other, but to deeply love someone and to say, hey, if I would be born in those circumstances with those experiences, I would be exactly that person, right? And then to relate from that space, saying, hey, that's another me. That's me just being born in a different space time context and actually that oneness, right? So I think for ecosystem leaders to drop that judgment and to tap into that oneness and to trust that we are on the same team. We are on the team humanity, we are on team planet, we are on team India, and all of us want the same thing. I think that stance of relating is the most essential and missing ingredient in what is keeping us from responding to these times.
What you're sharing now, and also what you shared earlier, this whole idea of expanding, coming together, really wanting to kind of look at the whole. It's also overwhelming to look at the whole, right? So I think the question that I'm coming up to is where does one need to build their own ecosystem? How do I define my own ecosystem, where I want to be the ecosystem leader? And I exercise this whole idea of whole because while yes, planetary boundary, state boundary, country boundary, there are many boundaries. So when you were talking about ecosystem and you're talking about ecosystem leadership where we need to relate, what is the context of that ecosystem? Where is one's ecosystem? Who really needs to build these deep ties?
I think the start of ecosystem is to realize that all boundaries are made up and illusionary and they have to be held lightly. I would not say boundaries are not required, but when you say, oh, what is the boundary of the forest? Right, of course, you can put a fence around the forest, but the truth is the undergrowth will still go beyond, the underlying mycelial network will go around. So, ecosystems by their very nature don't have very tight boundaries. They're porous and loose. and they smoothly transition from one to the other. So we have also what we call biomes, right? Places where two different ecosystems converge. So you can literally see from one ecosystem transition to the other, right? So I would say the first characteristic of ecosystems is to hold boundaries lightly. The second characteristic is to see interconnectedness. Now, that interconnectedness may not be geographically proximate. It could be that the Ministry of Urban Affairs passes a policy which impacts here in Navagao budget allocation for a garbage dump. So there is interconnectedness. Is that person a part of my ecosystem? At one level, you're like, oh, he's staying in Delhi, the bureaucrat. What's the connection? For example, I mean, this is a stretched example. Most of these decisions are BMC decisions. But what I'm trying to say is that ecosystem involves relationships. It doesn't involve geography. It doesn't involve your own tribe or clan alone. It involves seeing interconnections in every context. So let's take this podcast for example, right? You and me speaking, but there's Pankti who's also helping kind of direct it. There is Hardik who will edit it, and there's a bunch of people who will do the social media for it. We are an ecosystem when it comes to the context of this podcast. And if I say that, hey, I don't care about the rest, it's not going to work, right? So I need a relationship. I need to understand who are the people, right? So there is no one permanent ecosystem, right? But there's an ecosystem in a certain context. So you say, okay, we want to solve the problem of air. What is the ecosystem of factors that influences air, right? So there is no one static ecosystem. It's from which lens do you enter based on what you want to impact. And that then lets you know what are the interconnections, what are the boundaries that are being held too tightly. So you say, okay, can we hold these boundaries loosely, allow information and resources and people to flow, right? So ecosystem leadership is a perceptual switch at one level. You switch from these tight boundaries and disconnection to loose boundaries and interconnectedness, and try to influence areas where you do not have direct authority either, right? A lot of ecosystem leadership is influence without authority. It is trying to nudge people through narratives, through dialogue, through your own energy. So that's really what we're talking about when we say ecosystem. It's a blurry word, it can leave you very confused, but really it's acknowledging that there is no one. It's like, can you have a forest in a box? You could argue both ways. One, you can never have a forest in a box because a forest is a forest. The other way, you can also say in the box is a slice of the forest, which has still a slice, right? So your oak can still be a forest in a box. And there is a legal boundary, there is a membership boundary, but it has all the traits of the larger ecosystem, the energy, the narrative of the ecosystem. But the real ecosystem is vast and expansive.
The ecosystem reference is also what I'm taking from this is also reference from nature, reference from seeing how nature operates, and the word ecosystem in itself, I think, is first used in that context. At the same time, when I'm looking at ecosystem, it also kind of brings to me this question that isn't this like collaboration? Isn't this like partnership? Isn't this like saying that, oh, I need to kind of relate to people who are around me? And in our sector, we've been talking about collaboration for a while. We've been talking about coming together in different forms. So how are you seeing ecosystem being different or being distinct in any way from this whole idea of collaboration or coming together to do something?
Collaboration is for an objective typically, and even solidarity is around a cause. Ecosystem is about tapping into natural intelligence that makes unexpected encounters also happen, that makes new alliances unfold, right? And I think the collaboration is born out of our own mind, either the personal or the organizational mind, narrow thinking, right? And we're only going to collaborate with whoever is like aligned and so on. When you expand that to ecosystem, you start seeing new possibilities. You start seeing what Manish calls unholy alliances, right? You start seeing how something new is possible if you just interconnect and spontaneously relate. Sometimes ecosystem leadership may you don't have an immediate agenda, but you have resonance, and you collectively explore what wants to be born through us. Right? So you're not starting with the mind, you're not starting with an agenda, you're starting with interconnectedness and natural intelligence. And you're starting with trust and faith that the universe is bringing together people who should be collaborating and indicating it through resonance. So you say, hey, I'm limited, my org is limited, our intelligence is limited. In that intelligence, we have collaborated and built partnerships, and it's well and good and necessary. Can I release and relax it? Can I drop my judgments and connect to the other people who are influencing this? And can I trust that people will start showing up. The right people will start showing up if I energetically connect. And I don't put agenda at the start. I put relationship at the start, saying, hey, something may want to happen through us. We don't know, but we are resonating. And so it's a little bit of a mystical technology, then collaboration is very left brain technology. And when you say ecosystem coming together, you're also energetically tending to relationships which don't belong to you. You're going beyond those. You're not being like hisab nahi rakh rahe. You're not keeping a transaction on relationships. You are expanding your relational field. Now, the challenge is that you could end up with an overflood of relationships, and you're like, oh God, this is overwhelming. What is this ecosystem? It's crazy, right? There, I would say that that's when intuition, resonance, and objectives also become important. You can't totally dismiss objectives and say, hey, I want to become a socialite who's going to throw big parties with all the people I have resonance with. There is a context in which this leadership is unfolding, right? The context of your cause, your organization. And so there is a boundary, there is a little bit of a filter, right? So it's holding these two together. It's not only being boundaried, it's not only being boundless, holding light boundaries, right? And being willing to connect and relate, drop judgments, connect to people with organizations of power more than you. There'll always be, whoever you are, there will be people with more power, more clout, more strength than you, and you can judge them or you can collaborate with them. There will be people who are smaller than you. There'll be people with less resources. Again, you can marginalize them or you can collaborate. Ecosystem leadership is dropping all of that and saying, guys, let's align on what needs to happen and combine this kind of left brain collaboration with right brain synchronicities, a little looseness, a dropping of judgments, right? And then seeing what's possible.
So you're saying, while yes, left brain collaboration, but ecosystem leadership is taking it like a step beyond to say there may not be any immediate possibility, but there may be an immediate resonance. And we allow for the resonance to also unfold and say that what else may want to come through this. And that may be some other tangential form of bringing this.
Resonance and proximate possibility, in the sense that it's not like you totally disconnected people you resonate with. You keep filtering out and saying, hey, BRM has no immediate connection with, say, let's make a difference. But we're like, hey, we're in the youth space. There is a shared history. So let's connect, because who knows what's the next conference that's going to come out of this, or the next exchange, or the next volunteer movement. You don't know. I think to me, ecosystem leadership is also about saying we don't have all the answers. We don't know. We cannot only collaborate our way into creating a different world. We have to allow space for unlikely chance encounters. We have to allow space for, that's when you think laterally, out of the box, tangentially. That's when you create space for something new to happen. If you're only collaborating, we're acting out of our conditioned mind, we're acting out of our org interest, and nothing fresh will be born. So I am convinced that if you want fresh answers, if you want new insights, have to ease. And ease in a way that's not always transactional and outcome driven and collaborative, but a little bit more liminal, a little bit more let's explore space. Right. And weaving across, dropping judgments. I think all of that is the technology we're talking about.
Yeah, and somewhere I'm also hearing like letting our plan and our mind take a rest, not enter with preset plan and agenda and say, okay, this is what I want to fix with these five people in the room and like get going on.
Yeah, I'm not arguing for dumping that plan. I think we should go, but I'm arguing for holding that a little lightly in humility, saying that we do not know what wants to unfold, and we should do our work, but we should create space for other energies and intelligence to drop in. And that's when you really start kind of expanding your sense of possibility.
So let me try to also bring this together, right? Like saying if there's an NGO leader and if you have to convince this NGO leader, say why ecosystem leadership is important. And we all know NGO leaders have a lot of work to do. They're really pressured from on time, effort, everything. So if you are asked to make a case of ecosystem leadership for them, how would you make that case?
I feel like I'll start with the question of in doing what you're doing, what are you really doing? That Raghu asks, right? And I want to really ask NGO leaders, what are we really doing? Are we busy dealing with our own wounds and insecurities? Are we taking so much responsibility for our own organization that we made it a child which needs tending? Are we desperately firefighting to survive? Are we working on our own grand esteem or the organizational's largeness? All of that is valid and necessary. I'm saying, hey, but remember, our original promise was to start for a different vision for the society. That's why they started, right? And your vision cannot happen without other orgs and other stakeholders and other sectors. So you're really committed to your vision and you want to see this happen. It's time to step up from just thinking about your org to saying, hey, what's the society we want? What's my piece in it? And who are the others who need to be there in this piece? Right? That needs the organization to be ready. That needs the next level of leadership to come up, which means the whole organization has to level up one step up from where they are operating. It needs you to expand and detach a bit from your org and connect to first the collective, the sector, collective meaning the cause, then the sector, then the country. You need that gradual expansion. And I feel there is a leadership deficit precisely because a lot of our civil society leaders are too busy with their own orgs or at best their own causes. They're not expanding beyond those to see what's possible. So my pitch would be both to kind of donors, funders, and people who are making this possible to say, hey, coordination and ecosystem leadership is the next level for all of us, right? And that's not just for the sector, it's across sector, Samaj Sarkar Bazaar coming together. And to the NGO leader, I would just remind them that your destiny is to lead the society, not just your own org. And why not move towards that? And the pathway to that is not making your org larger and larger. The pathway to that is really bringing something beyond your org together, right? And really building that whole, like I said, ecosystem includes bringing in the elders and their wisdom, building in the next line not only for your org but for the larger kind of cause. So if more and more of us start thinking expansively like that, right, and stop giving everything we have only to our organizations and just taking some part of our time to tune in, to sense make, I think it would be a huge benefit. I had these thought experiments where I would say, okay, 10% ecosystem tax, just as you have GST saying, hey, can you take 10% of time, just give it to ecosystem without returns, trusting that over time, if a lot of us invest that 10%, a new coordination layer can emerge, which will not emerge if somebody pays for it or in any other way, right? Sometimes I framed it as a contribution or a gift. So I've been trying to convince NGO leaders to move beyond org and move beyond org before their org becomes large. Already move beyond org, right? Already start convening, connecting. Yeah.
So I have a lot of empathy and I have a lot of defense also on behalf of NGO leaders. Like, while yes, the ask and invitation is very appealing, there are a lot of constraints. But also, I think I would ask you to also define what is this deficit that you spoke about. You just like broadly touched and kind of came out of it. So, what's the deficit that you're seeing in the sector or seeing in the way we are looking at solving social issues?
Before that, I'll come to the constraints because I have to engage on that, and I know you're like one of the best examples of somebody doing multiple things. The constraints are always going to be there, and they're going to get worse as things are going to get more ambiguous and faster, as funding is going to get more difficult, as you're going to get pushed more and more to kind of deliver impact. The
Hmm.
forces are only going to push you towards narrowing and more focus, right? And if that happens to everybody, we'll be in a race to the bottom of everybody fending for their own orgs, and then the larger problems never being responded to. So there is a little bit of an element of sacrifice. Maybe आपका
Hmm.
organization थोड़ा ठोकर खाएगा. You'll be like, okay, there is a trade-off here, but I think in the long run, it'll create a thriving ecosystem. So the way to visualize it is to say that, okay, maybe there are, different plots of land, and in one plot you have a coconut tree and one you have a pineapple tree. So the forest doesn't form because it's plotted. For the forest to form, the plots will have to be dissolved, fungus will have to be allowed first, and then the shrubs and herbs. And so we're trying to move from this plotted land kind of landscape to a forest landscape. So you have to let go of the plot, you have to share a little bit of your fruits and water and let the other fruit, water, energy, bees, pollen come in. That's what we're trying to do. Regenerate this whole eroded kind of soil insect. So,
Hmm.
and I'm saying, hey, isn't that what we need to do right now? This is the calling of our times. The calling of our times is not to get the largest possible org alone. You should do that. I think we all must grow. We all must impact. Alongside that, we all have to walk together and grow. So I think that's the invitation for the expansion. Deficit in leadership, I think, is on several fronts. I think the moral leadership required for our
Hmm.
society is missing, and moral leadership can only come from sacrifice. Moral leadership can only come from contribution. There are several moral leaders and notable ones. I think still civil society, in one of its roles of holding a mirror to Bazaar and Sarkar and saying, guys, what about the ethics? What about the wisdom? Because you're only looking for profits, you're only looking for votes. what about the larger context? And I think leadership that brings Samaj to its stature, I think that's
Hmm.
one big deficit that I can see. And that leadership, again, I think what is limiting it is we expand our egos, but then orgs start holding our egos. So I am humble, but I want my org to be great. And so it's another form of ego, right? Organizational ego. If that expands to cause, then you're like, oh, my cause is the be all and end all. And if that gets solved, the world will be better. So I think the lack of expansion has led to, as civil society, us not claiming our stature. So that's kind of one deficit that I see. The other deficit is these ecosystem weavers, right? Everybody is busy with their own orgs and causes. So what is really collective sense making? And why is sense
Hmm.
making important? Because we are in a chaos. There's an information explosion. We don't know what is true anymore. How do we coordinate efforts? We're getting into more and more randomness. The answer to that randomness is not more arbitrary action, but more sense making. To say what are the deep trends, what are the patterns, what's going on, and using that co-created knowledge to drive your own direction, not your own kind of sense, but a collective co-created knowledge, right? There's a deficit because nobody is being able to bring all of us together as leaders to collectively. Everybody has conference fatigue. Everybody doesn't want to. And most people don't want to do more gatherings. Leaders, particularly, like I don't want another workshop. I want another gathering, and I get it. We have to find newer ways to sense make. Maybe it's tech, maybe it's one-on-one conversations that are relayed. Without sense making, our actions are not going to cohere, and without that coherence, we are not going to be able to respond to the meta crisis.
Now that's many other things which I would like
And
to
sorry,
double
one
click.
last, yeah, one last. I think the third deficit is the deficit across ideological divides. I think we're getting more and
Um,
more polarized, and there's deficit of leadership that is able to convene and connect across. That kind of leadership is not visible. It's not incentivized. There's no personal or organizational profit in doing this. Yet the society desperately needs bridge builders, and it's not seen as
hmm.
leadership. Weaving is not seen as leadership yet. Ecosystem leadership involves a lot of weaving, but weaving is seen as like, oh, networking, time pass, exchanging contacts, this being a social butterfly. And we are making a case to say, hey, this is serious. This is the work also, right? And it
Hmm.
needs to be seen with that sacredness. It needs to be approached with that mindset and the pedagogy of weaving, right? That's what we are all trying to put out as our ecosystem of Wisdom Tree, Bodhisanga, BRM, and Wise Cities. We're trying to put out saying, hey, this is also the work. This is not time pass. In fact, this is the work for our times, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's where we are.
So just going back to what you were saying about the sector, right? The identity of the sector itself and the sector in itself looks at itself in a certain way. And when we are talking about ecosystem, we're not just talking about sector, is what I'm hearing from you. We're also talking about the Samaj, the Sarkar, and the Bazaar. And in that context, what do you see the role of the sector itself? Because if weaving means bringing all of them together, also, one is why the case to bring them together, and what's the role of Samaj and social civil society on behalf of Samaj? How are you seeing that role come together?
I think the answer to the question should start from what is not our role, not what is our role, right? What is not our role? So we're called NGOs, so governance is not our role. We're not the
Hmm.
government. Service delivery is not our role. I think that's very important. In today's time,
Hmm.
civil society has ended up being a service delivery mechanism because it costs less to deliver through civil society than through markets or through the government. So government is very happy to use civil society, underpaid social workers, uh, limited resources because they're like, इससे delivery हो रहा है और अगर हमारा if we are able to deliver through this and get credit for it, what's wrong? Don't need to be service
Hmm.
delivery providers except in last miles where governments cannot reach. A very different context. If we end up being just service delivery providers, I feel again that's a reduction, right? If we only become ideological kind of counterweights, saying that hey, the government is a right-leaning government, so civil society's job is to be left-leaning, for example. And I mean, civil society is across the spectrum. I'm not excluding the right ideological civil society, but it's not about just ideological warfare, right? Because that also is necessary. It creates a diversity of views. It's a limited role. I think the most, two or three very important roles, right? One, like I said, the moral role is very important.
Hmm.
Irrespective of ideology, government and business have to keep being reminded of their purpose. That the government's purpose is not to get re-elected, but to care for citizens. The business's role is not to only make profit, but to create a better society, right? So reminding that, and we have the moral authority, the legitimacy, we have sacrificed to be in this sector, and I feel reclaiming that. And why should anybody listen to us unless we come from a moral power? think that moral power has really eroded. Second, I think our role is not only to be in opposition to the government and the business, but to see collaborations also. Because yes, opposition and friction is good, it's necessary, it keeps everybody on its toes. But if we don't collaborate around solutions, and I feel civil society has some of the most innovative low cost solutions to problems, but because we are skeptical of business and government, these solutions never scale up, they never collaborate. So I think in this era, civil society has to say, we don't fully agree with you, we judge you, we're going to correct you and hold you accountable, yet at the same time we'll collaborate with you even more to build
Hmm.
solutions, and not collaborate with you as a underdog, collaborate with you as equals, right? And civil society here, I'm referring to NGOs, not the larger kind of body of Samaj. So we say we'll collaborate at par. We'll not collaborate as underdogs who are, relying on business for CSR and government for the FCRA or to deliver.
Hmm.
So I think coming on and reclaiming our position as an equal partner, and then from an equal partner going beyond that to say we are able to build collaboration because we don't compete as hard, right? We do compete, that's the truth of the matter. The
Hmm.
idea that can we show the way and transcend these things, right? Just as India needs to be like the Vishwa Guru and India has the potential to be a Vishwa Guru, I think civil society has the potential to be integrating force. And again, ecosystem leadership, if we don't exercise, will again be yet another reduced version of what's possible. But we can exercise ecosystem leadership. If somewhere ecosystem leadership will come, it's from the civil society.
And are there any contexts which you feel are like more right to bring this kind of a ecosystem leadership activated?
Yes, I do feel that unoccupied centers, which means causes where there is broad consensus, like air, as I gave an example of, where everybody agrees we want to breathe cleaner air and we're not able to get clean air. Even Delhi,
Hmm.
where our prime minister or the core bureaucracy sits, is not able to get clean air, right? So clearly, even our strongest people are not able to give us what all
Hmm.
citizens want. The advantage of doing ecosystem leadership in that space is there's lesser friction. You're able to align most of the actors very quickly and actually break the silos of information and connections and build the rel field there. So that's kind of one domain where ecosystem leadership can be there, where there is, whereas if you take issues around say caste or religion, which are very important issues, but there is polarization there, harder to convene, and that takes a longer process of dialogue and consensus building and so on. uh, the other place where I see ecosystem leadership being valuable is around geographies. So let's say you
Hmm.
are in your locality and you're just working on streetlights, garbage, and civic issues, but maybe your locality has a aftercare center or an orphanage. Maybe it has a community center. Maybe it has a market where hawkers are sitting. And ultimately, your locality experiences all of these things taken together. Ecosystem leadership at the hyper local level, where you set up a experience center, a KYC, for example, or an adda. Hyper local is
Hmm.
another place where ecosystem leadership can really happen. And I think that's valuable. And I think third, to me, ecosystem leadership that bridges policy to practice. Right now, these are all
Hmm.
disconnected. There's some policy happening, some implementation, something else is happening in practice which doesn't inform policy. So, ecosystem leadership that can weave this whole spectrum, I think that's also a very valuable form of leadership. People who are actually spending time not just doing think tank policy or just doing implementation or just doing capacity building, but trying to integrate and align all of this. I think some of this basic alignment is only missing. Right. So I think some of that ecosystem leadership is important. I think while we may not fully as BRM ecosystem subscribe to it, but I think even in building moral legitimacy, an ecosystem is required. No one org or one leader will have a voice. I think the sector, we as a sector need to come together. And when I say we don't fully subscribe to it, I think our focus has been much more on constructive action and moving. At the same time, we are in solidarity with getting civil society voice out there. That needs an ecosystem, including people in the
Hmm.
government to listen to us and sympathize with us. Right? Like I think Gandhiji is the best example of an ecosystem leader. He had business, he had government, he had relationships all across, and he had a mass movement. He had ideology, he had practice. So Gandhi would be a great example of somebody who was able to weave an entire nation into an ecosystem, right? And including opponents, dialogue with opponents. So that's what I think we need to do in our own little ways now.
So ecosystem leadership definitely seems to be beyond that of the NGO leader, so to say. And while I asked you, how will you pitch this to an NGO leader? I think I'm flipping now the question to say, okay, what's the role of other stakeholders like, philanthropy, donors, intermediary organizations, maybe think tanks? How do you see their role in enabling ecosystem leadership? And what's the pitch for them? Why do they need to invest in ecosystem leadership? Or what do they need to understand about ecosystem leadership to support in a way that it enables it?
I think there are two layers: ecosystem leadership as a mindset and ecosystem leadership as a practice. I think as a mindset, ecosystem leadership needs to become the default mindset, where all the
Hmm.
time you're thinking, what's the largest set of stakeholders, what's the broader vision we are moving towards, what are the boundaries that can be loosened, what information and knowledge can flow through this system, right? And how can synergies be tapped? That, irrespective of whoever you are at whichever level, we need to start thinking ecosystem as our central kind of theme, right? The larger picture. So that mindset is to be democratized across. Ecosystem leadership as a practice is very invisible. It's very hard to quantify, its outcomes are fuzzy. And so, what is needed from philanthropists, donors, and all of us together is one, trust that over time metrics will develop, over time the what comes out of this will be valuable. So there is a always, for a technology to be applied and proven, there is a time gap. I think there you have to resource it till it reaches its full potential. So I think that patience in how you build capacity around weaving, what can weaving lead to, seeing some miracles hopefully that we're trying to see in the next 3 to 5 years with our weaving. So I think one is that patient capital, which has trust, which agrees to kind of value the intangible and so on. um, Second, I see philanthropy already as big ecosystem leaders today. The power
Mm,
philanthropy has, they are convening. So they themselves actually are being ecosystem leaders. At the same time, I'm saying philanthropy should not be the only ecosystem leader, because it's using financial capital as leverage to convene the ecosystem. We're saying if financial capital becomes the leverage to convene the ecosystem, the power differential is too much. And it's harder to surface what really goes on, right? Uh, if we are able to have civil society leaders also as ecosystem weavers who are not convening on the strength of money, but convening on the strength of relationship and shared vision, that's the leadership that we also need, right? So that's kind of the invitation. I would also pitch it as leverage, because I think ecosystem leadership can really leverage efforts of multiple organizations and actually unlock value in a way that has not been unlocked, right? So if you are, again, I keep bringing air because we're working on air, and if you create an ecosystem which also brings builders and government and schools and solution providers and bureaucracy and citizens together, the net value that will accrue will not be to any one org, it will be in the commons. And commons are notoriously hard to value and define, right? It will create a broader spectrum of futures. It will create benefit for everybody. So donors also need to start thinking, saying, hey, this is also value. Just because it doesn't accrue that specifically, just because it's not so visible,
mm,
we can find ways to do this. I mean, social change was also fuzzy before M&E came in and log frames came in. So there is a process to that. I think I would invite some investment, some resourcing, some patience. The great thing about ecosystem leadership is not capital intensive, because you're actually just coordinating and weaving, but its returns are exponential, right? So I would say it's a
mm.
very leveraged bet and a missing layer.
You also brought out many forms of capital in the ecosystem leadership piece that are important. If you had to, summarize and bring together, if you had to name what are most important capitals that enable an ecosystem, because the relationship beyond transaction, just about beyond money, is an important part of how an ecosystem can coexist, sustain longer, etc. Because otherwise, it's very hard to say, okay, finance is the only thing. Then it's very dependent on only one capital. So what are other capitals also which are important for an ecosystem to kind of, keep nourishing, keep moving, keep becoming without just being dependent on financial capital?
Yeah, there is a bundle of three capitals first that I'll put out, which is social, relational, and cultural. We usually call all of this social capital, which is your reputation, your networks, and so on, which is kind of the surface end of that. Relational capital is out of those which are deeper relationships you have, where you can co-sense, connect, cohere, be in alignment, and so on. It's a narrower but a richer form, right, of capital. And then there is
Mm.
cultural capital, which you're drawing from your past. You're saying we are a civilization which is relational. We have held community together. This is the time of India rising. And we have cultural strength. Whether you celebrate a Diwali, that's also tapping into a cultural capital, right? Whether you form a narrative around something that is mythological, spiritual, that is also tapping into cultural capital. And I think we need to get better at tapping into cultural capital also. So as an ecosystem also, the cultural capital would be saying every generation has faced its own challenges. When you say this is our Yugdharma, you're tapping into cultural capital,
Mm.
right? So I think those three as a bundle, social, relational, and cultural. I would definitely say moral capital, which we are all cultivating. Why should somebody listen to you, especially if it's a non-transactional listening? It's a transactional listening where they stand to benefit money, contacts, they listen, right? People will listen to each other. But the moral listening that you provide to an elder, that you provide to somebody who's saying the truth. It's like the kid who screams that the king is wearing no clothes, and everybody listens to the kid because he's talking about truth. Our ability to articulate the truth, I think that's another capital that is, and that moral I would bundle with spiritual. Spiritual because ecosystem leadership requires you to feel oneness and interconnectedness, right? So I think that oneness is spiritual practice. So that's kind of the second kind of bundle. I think time is required. We don't look at time as capital, but
Mm.
time is this flowing thing. And for ecosystem leadership, you need to give time away from, you need to take, and that is finite. It's not infinite. So you need to take time away from your org and maybe even yourself to say that, okay, this is going to eventually nourish me and the org also. It's like moving some of the time capital, if I have to put it, because it's not just money. I don't think money will make an ecosystem thrive. It is time. And again, in time, I will layer it to say that there is time, but there is also vitality and life force. If I'm giving you time, but I'm absent, it's pointless because it just doesn't add up to anything. But if there is life force, if I'm being present to you, presence is also a form of capital. So again, it's not just time, it's vitality and presence. And bringing that uh, allows kind of the ecosystem leadership to happen. And lastly, I think natural capital in the sense that one is, of course, deeper connection to the planet and nature, but also learning from nature. So the knowledge, I mean, knowledge is a capital and we need knowledge. We need to build a pedagogy on weaving. So I'll come to knowledge capital, but nature is also a resource, right? A partner, actually, not even a resource in making this happen. Learning from nature, being embedded in nature and the planet and so on. And like I said, lastly, knowledge capital. Knowledge capital is we need to build a pedagogy of weaving, need to articulate ecosystem leadership. That knowledge needs to be created and applied, going beyond collaboration. So I think that's also something we need. So yeah, it's a bunch of various capitals.
So it's a bunch of too many things that somebody needs to bring in their basket to be able to do ecosystem leadership. That's how it's landing right now.
I would put it the reverse way. It's not people need to bring in too many things. They need to relax their focus from being overly focused on one capital. The other things will come on their own because they are there in nature. Right? So it's not like, oh, I have to now bring social capital. No, if I release my focus from my financial or my org, I'll have time to connect and social capital will start forming. Right? So we don't have to bring, they're all there, but I think right now we have hyper focused onto one narrow frame. If we relax it, the other capitals will naturally start coming in. And that's my belief.
Are there any examples or any stories from the past that you feel highlight this whole role of ecosystem leadership and why bringing these different forms of capitals together while we're trying to look at any issue from a space of ecosystem and not just from a space of problem intervention by an org?
And for me, the most vibrant example is the freedom struggle that forced ecosystem leadership because you had to rise above your own kingdom, your prant, your language to look at the whole. That was, of course, the compulsion of the times also, but then everybody who surfaced as leaders were agile. They could connect to each other. They could collaborate across differences. I still can't imagine how they got the constitution out in such a short time with this diversity. You have to think ecosystem. You have to think larger to get there. But that was coming from the calling of the times, right? After that, I think we again went back into our silos. We started giving prominence first to bazaar, saying that, large industry will actually redeem India, or then the government becoming larger. So I think there was a time when ecosystem leadership kind of came in. In the recent times, I look at Asha as one of the best examples. Asha Kisan Swaraj as an ecosystem that is able to take on laws and policy by convening a vast range of stakeholders across the ideological spectrum. And I think Asha, the leadership they have, the philosophy, ideology they have, is a very vibrant ecosystem. I feel more and more that resistance struggles will need constructive actions attached to them. So you can't just resist because resistance is seen as nuisance. that you're coming only with problems, right? And if your problem is not attached to a solution, then you are discredited or seen as a nuisance. And I think now, again, the compulsion for ecosystem leadership or the ask is that don't come only with problems. Bring in a solution that we can implement also, right? And that's the onus is on us to do that. So I think some of that is gonna require thinking. There are localities in Bombay, like Bandra West, I see as having some ecosystem. Of course, it has economic capital, it has prominence, but it has people who care and really kind of help that. And we've done Bandra Local as an event to look at that ecosystem as well. So there are geographical ecosystems also, right? And in a way, while we're packaging this in a new way, every community, every village was an ecosystem, right? Like our earlier traditions involved exchanges, relationships. So it's not like we're talking about something that new. I think being an ecosystem, thinking about the whole is embedded in our cultural fabric. I think we're just now reclaiming it and saying, let's bring it back.
Why do we need to name it again in this form? If this was already existent, why did we lose it? And then कहाँ पे ये बदल क्यों गया?
And we need to keep reviving. People say, "Oh, this is old wine in new bottle," but we're like, "Yeah, but you need new bottles as time goes." to Yeah, so I don't see it as a wrong thing to bring attention back to it, to remind ourselves. Except this time, it's in a planetary context. It's a much larger context than just local. What has happened, I think, is over the several decades, our uh, capitalism and now late stage capitalism, techno feudalism, all of this has increasingly taken a grip and
Hmm.
crowded out other capitals and pushed us to be single metric, pushed us to be siloed, pushed us to be identified with ourselves or our orgs. In a way, they have stoked up that insecurity, I feel, that makes us shrink. Right? And of course, they are a proxy for our own internal processes, our own insecurities, our own boundaries. They have latched onto that insecurity, fear, greed, and so on. So I think the presence of financial capital has led to some degree of fragmentation and only transactional alignment. We'll
Hmm.
collaborate if it's profitable. It's really crowded out things. So I think we've gone into a loop of that. If your competitor focuses more on, say, something like making more profits of fundraising, you are also going to have to do that to survive, especially in bazaar and in government. If a party funds its way to elections, the other party will have to do it. So I think that race to the bottom dynamic, very game theoretic dynamic, has also happened. That's why we've kind of increasingly fragmented and disconnected. And then trust has
Right.
eroded, right? So when this happens, you stop trusting, you stop relating to the other. Trust erodes, relational skills erode because you don't know how to relate. Information explodes, you don't know how to sense make. So it's a complete downhill from where we were,
Hmm.
and we are trying to re-bring the wholesomeness and the wholeness to this whole.
Yeah. And that also kind of says why the need to have at times language, new language, which brings back an essence, which probably was much more innate. So maybe when we spoke about leadership, intuitive understanding of leadership included maybe some decades ago how it has to be collective, ecosystem,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah.
But the times have kind of eroded it, and hence the context we are in now, it needs us to reclaim the definition of leadership and bring a new flavor to it. And so, can we talking about ecosystem leadership? This means this in this context.
Yeah, that and ecosystem leadership as a placeholder, right? We could have just said build trust.
Mm,
Trust is missing, just rebuild trust. Then you're like, no, no. How do you build trust? You say, oh, build trust relationally. So like, okay, build trust relationally. Why don't you just say build trust relationally? They're like, why? They're like, because there's a meta crisis and our ability to solve problems is gone and we have become siloed. So like, okay, build trust relationally to respond to the meta crisis, right? By going beyond silos, as inspired by nature, by weaving across. So as it all starts accumulating, you have to put it into a word and explain that as a nuance, right? But if you ask me very simply, we're like, okay, let's restore our relational field, right? Or let's rebuild our relationships in service of
mm.
the planet. We can simplify it to a 8-10 year old, for example, as like, okay, what is the 10 year old's ecosystem leadership, for example, definition? I'd say, yeah, just better relationships, right? That are full of trust.
Yes, absolutely. I'm also kind of playing with a few more words in my mind, right? Like the sector's been talking about partnerships and collaboration, and you mentioned coordination a while ago when we were talking. How are you distinguishing between coordination and collaboration?
Collaboration as being more outcome oriented, maybe even more bulky, because you have to get specific agreements and you have to have a plan, right? So that's kind of a preset. Everybody, it's like in a theater, in a drama, actors have lines. When that actor speaks, then this actor speaks, and that's how the play comes together. You're collaborating for a play. But a jazz band, for example, is coordinating around a loose rhythm. You don't know what the other person is going to play, but you know there is a loose rhythm that is being followed, and you don't have to force the other person to do anything. You don't have to wait for the other person to do something. You're loosely jamming. And we're saying collaboration has a limit, coordination is limitless. You can coordinate around it. So today, for example, you see a movement fighting for some rights in some part, right? Some nature rights. You can coordinate around it in solidarity and say, we'll also start something. You don't need to collaborate. So coordination is literally looking at signals that are being sent out and aligning to those signals rather than bulky collaborations where you have plans and agreements and outcomes. I think coordination is the future, us being able to coordinate. And that doesn't happen without a relational field and a shared vision, which ecosystem leadership creates.
What you're saying is coordination is also relatively lighter. It's easier, but it's also expansive at the same time. It's
Absolutely. Yeah.
also around something which all of us can easily kind of move towards rather than having to go into the details of it and look at what worked, what didn't work. I don't agree with this. I agree with this kind of specifics.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think, and it's lighter, but it's more needed even more now because there's a limit
Mm.
to how much you can collaborate, but there's no limit to how far you can coordinate.
And another distinction, I'm curious on this because we've been talking about again relationships and relational fields. What is the distinction between networking and relationship building in the context you are saying in the context of ecosystem leadership?
It's just, I think networking is a lot more transactional and outcome oriented. Relational fields are relationships which are built for their own reward and with the trust that something wants to emerge through them, right? In a conference, you can find people who are looking over your shoulder and exchanging visiting cards and they're networking. And then you find a gang which is hanging out in the corner and chilling and really talking about what's going on as the relational field. Networking won't last. The relational field will want to meet at the next conference again to gossip and say what's going on. It's not just gossip. That relational field is sense making at a much deeper level than what networking can do. Right? And that's what we're asking for more and more of now. But for that gang to do an adda in the conference, they'll need to sneak out of a session and hang out because conference has not created time for the relational field. Why has it not created time? Because it has an outcome. What is the outcome? Typically, it's around a financial capital related outcome, right? So this is the whole link, right? On how one capital and innately, if you ask people, would they like to hang out and chill and connect? I think most people would say, I would. But I have my outcomes. I need to network with X number of people. I've paid for this gathering, conference, not gathering. So yeah, so conferences are more networking. I think addas and gatherings are more rel field.
And what is the link of ecosystem leaders hanging out together with sense making? Because you just said it's not just gossip, it's sense making.
It is the sense making. The hangout is the sense making. The hangout is where you let your guards down and share what's really going on with you and in the system. Others can amplify it or object to it without feeling attacked. Not on a panel where you have to agree or disagree or perform. You're in a very kind of intimate space of sorts where you can be vulnerable in yourself and others can also be. That's when you start getting a sense of what's really going on. For example, over the last 2 months, we've spoken to about 80 different people in one on ones as Bodhisanga. And we start hearing when you start connecting, and those have been one on ones, only a few have been hangouts. You start hearing certain patterns. And those patterns can't come from a call where you're like, okay, hi Kejal, what are the top three trends you're seeing? Because those will be parroted answers, right? But if I'm checking in with you, Kejal, how are you doing? And you're like, I'm feeling the need to go to some spiritual place for re energizing, like, hey, I'm feeling that too, and I was talking to X, and now you're sense making that okay, a bunch of people are feeling that they need to go to some sanctuaries, some retreat, some religious place, and you could say, hey, why don't 10 of us go and you know uh, take a retreat into a sacred grove forest, right? And then people will come. You're like, oh, how did this invitation succeed? It succeeded because you hung around and actually tuned into what's really going on, and then what will come out of that retreat, you don't know, right? It's tapping into a different organizing technology, and that needs you to hold agenda much more lightly and allow for a more human connection to form, right? And a long-term human connection to form. I don't think this is time for quick fix relationships. I think we have to build long-term relationships which are accessible. It's
I have a
leadership
very
of that.
paradoxical question on this one because you said long term lose, but the times are seeming more and more urgent and fast and quick. The paradox of the two is quite jarring.
Yeah, I don't even think it's a paradox. I feel as times outside go faster, you need to be slower internally to stay anchored, and it has to balance the chaos outside. The clarity within has to balance the chaos outside. The slowness within has to balance the speed outside, right? And the relationality within has to balance the transactionality outside. So for me, it's really you're trying to regulate the whole by holding the opposite, right? And saying, yeah, times are urgent, let's slow down, right? And I think that's the resistance to the mainstream and balancing it. That's how I see it.
We've been talking, it's been almost an hour. We've been talking about ecosystem leadership. We zoomed out from the distinction of ecosystem leadership to while in what context, sectors, this, that. I think the question I'm coming back to saying that, while in the first place you said ecosystem leadership is in a way the invitation to reconnect to the primary purpose we kind of signed in for. But I'm also kind of asking from a much more, objective outcome centric lens to say, okay, is there an outcome to do ecosystem leadership for? Is there some result that you feel ecosystem leadership will kind of, because I have to go back to a world where the world will still ask me these questions. Well, I feel very connected and related to what you're sharing. But is it towards some outcome? Is it towards some results?
Absolutely, it's towards results which are currently not happening because they seem too audacious, ambitious, or unsolvable, right? So let's say rains in Mumbai have paralyzed Mumbai yet again, and citizens are sitting and asking the government, right? Because there's no relational field really between citizens, government, and tech providers right now fully, and there's deep corruption in the system, right, which is not being called out. And we're saying, hey, if you want to solve rains in Mumbai, you can't just keep sitting and asking the government to fix it. You need to step up to build connections between solution providers, citizens, government, bureaucracy, elected reps. And surprise, surprise, such a ecosystem is not present because everybody is doing siloed, citizens are demanding, government is delivering, and net net we're falling short. Right now, if you tell somebody, hey, we'll fix in a 5 to 10 year range air in Mumbai or monsoon responses, they'll be like, yeah, let the government do it. But that's not happening, right? So with ecosystem leadership, you will solve a whole new class of problems which are currently considered unsolvable or too ambitious, right? And you will solve them not by solving those problems, but by coordinating around solutions. Right now, the solution provider, there may be a solution somewhere to Mumbai's rains, but the solution provider is not talking to the government, or maybe they're talking but they're not bribing the government, for all you know. But maybe citizens can come in and say, hey, these guys have a better solution, why are you going after that provider? Yeah, there's so much sense of possibility when this is deployed. We are at early stages of deploying this, right? So we're deploying it in wise cities, we're deploying it in Bodhi Sangha, trying to find causes where this leadership can come through as well. But I think all those problems which are recurring, unsolvable, I think ecosystem leadership has a chance to take a stab at those problems. Problem of disinformation, and hopefully eventually stickier problems like caste, like polarization, like gender. I think ecosystems can start solving those, but that's a much later phase. I think more immediately solvable are those which are not getting solved, in spite of everybody's good intentions, perhaps. Right. So I think that's what I would say ecosystem leadership can solve. I think before we make tall and audacious claims, we need to establish, test this out, and kind of say, okay. So I mean, in a sense, Asha, as I gave an example, is able to stop regulation from happening in a negative direction. That's a tall thing that they're able to change. Now, it needs an ecosystem to rally to make that change happen. Right. So I think yeah, it has a lot of promise as I see it.
One of the other contrasts I want to ask you about, Abhishek, is this whole centralized versus decentralized. Given the times we are in, things are moving more and more centralized, polarized. How are you seeing ecosystems in this context? Does it seem contrast? Does it still the response?
Yeah, I mean, there is a centralization of power and leadership because the world is getting more and more chaotic and confusing. At such a time, cultures and nations want strong leaders and want everything concentrated around them. I feel that creates an even more case for ecosystem leadership because centralized systems cannot sense make the way a decentralized network can. Right? Of course, you need a center where all that sensing is being processed and decisions are being taken. Uh, you need a network to actually balance that centralization. And if everybody works in a centralized leadership and says what the leader wants to hear and kind of create an echo chamber, you move away from what's really going on. Your sense making goes off. So a network of people who are sense making and relaying that sense making. So the idea is not to create some kind of a secret ingredient that you want to hide. You relay the sense making to clear people's heads and collective understanding to saying this is what we think is really going on. You get into dialogue around what is needed and what's true. You coordinate around the directions that are broadly being agreed on. Right? To me, ecosystem leadership is a complementary technology to centralized leadership. That just as there is centralized leadership and concentration of power, you need to balance it with the weaving and the decentralization, right? And the two go hand in hand in some ways for me. In the sense, yes, that's inevitable that the way things are getting centralized, but maybe the ecosystem leadership can break a little bit of that concentration of power or complement it in a way that it's more wise. That centralized leadership becomes wiser because there was an ecosystem that was kind of supporting it. So yeah, I think it goes well hand in hand.
Almost like a balance.
Absolutely, yeah, a balance.
And one of the other questions also is, how are you seeing this vis-a-vis individualization and individual leadership approaches, right? When we are looking at the times, currently more and more individual leaders are coming up. And in contrast to that, we are seeing ecosystem leadership, which is much more seems like a collective form of leadership. Uh, is that in sync with the times or is it not?
It's an evolutionary journey. We are a collectivist culture, and then after modernity, we started getting individualized, and now increasingly so. Ecosystem leadership is trying to blend the two and invite that individualism again to expand into collectiveness, but with a difference that it is not a collectiveness which blurs everything into one kind of one stroke. It lets us take our unique gifts but connect them to the other. So it is a kind of reclaiming of the collective but having
Mm-hmm.
individualized, not pre-individualization, right? So ecosystem
Mm,
leadership is reclaiming collective, but not reclaiming it in a way to erase our differences, but to actually start from our differences and sense make across them, right? So in a way, it's an
mm,
evolutionary step from individual leadership and saying that, hey, individual leadership has created siloed organizations, and now we need to break those silos and reclaim the wisdom. And particularly in India, I think as a culture which is collectivist, it's very natural that we build this ecosystem leadership. I think we are great at it. I think we will be great at it. We are great at a transactional relational field. I think we've forgotten how to build the deeper relational fields. And I think we can remember. I want to plug in the relational field playbook also here, a playbook we wrote on how relational fields build, some frames, some ways of thinking about it. It's available on our website to download, bodhisangha.org. It's possible by our NP's support, and it lays out whatever we know in a very clean and neat way.
definitely. Plus to the reading for this book. It's not one of those typical books where you will find 5 hacks to improve your relationships or relational field. It's much more a experience sharing. It's much more a stream of consciousness kind of a writing. It has many more nuances and intimate pieces of different relationships from the social space, from personal space, all coming together.
Yes,
So it's
zero
definitely
percent.
an important
It's
piece.
0% AI, because it is. It starts with saying what can be written that hasn't been said by our ancestors or can be written by AI, and it is in a relationship with the reader. The aim of the book is also to be in a relationship with the reader and talk to them in a very intimate way. So I would definitely invite people to explore it.
Lovely. And another question I have is, we've been talking about ecosystems in the context of leadership only until now. Is it possible that individuals also have some role in this ecosystem and they can also enable ecosystems? They can also kind of support weaving. Is there a role for an individual, a solo person who may want to be still part of this kind of work?
Absolutely. I mean, in a way, every node, every person, in a way, if they start plugging into the ecosystem and start relaying, is how the forest will come. A mycelial network of fungal, communicating, that what we call the wood wide web, right? The web is necessary for trees to communicate with each other and for the forest's health. And therefore, each person in that way is a leader, and they have to lead by sense making, by relaying the right signals, by connecting across, right? And of course, there is a deliberate act of weaving that ecosystem leaders do additionally, which is to intentionally connect, intentionally deepen, intentionally sense make. But for any individual, wherever you are, can you start going beyond your org? Can you start connecting to different people? Can you start listening to different perspectives? Can you start relaying what you are understanding so that it may be challenged and further the truth? Right? Can you share your visions? Can you dialogue across divides? So I would invite each individual at a mindset level to start becoming an ecosystem weaver, an ecosystem leader. And then when you start weaving, yes, you are exercising that ecosystem leadership. You don't have to be the head of an organization. Maybe you are a next in line leader who reaches out to next in line leaders from three different organizations, comes together and shares what they are going through. That is an act of leadership at an ecosystem level, right? So it doesn't have to be only, it's especially exclusively for leaders of the civil society. It's open to all of us, and we all will have to do this for it to work.
When you describe this act, it almost seemed like I know a few people who very naturally do this. So is ecosystem weaving something which is cultivable, or is it something that people are some naturally good at it and hence they can do this better?
It's in the same category as the question of are leaders born or made, right? There is no, it's a perpetual debate. There is a spark in certain people. There's a certain natural weaving energy in some people. At the same time, I more and more believe that it can be cultivated. It can be taught. There is a pedagogy that we're building. We call it the pedagogy of Tana Bana, warp and weft. So we can build this capacity. There is a spark, and I think the spark to relate is very innately human. The
Hmm.
desire to connect and the curiosity of knowing what someone different from you is also human. So to that extent, we need to tap into it, and everybody has the potential to be an ecosystem leader.
And ecosystem weaving definitely means weaving at all layers and at all
Absolutely.
levels and across verticals and horizontals. So in
Yeah.
that sense, yes, invitation is for more and more people to look at this ecosystem weaving. Also, as we are coming towards the closure or towards the last few pieces of this conversation, I'm curious to also ask you for application of this, right? Like in our work that we do, in the work that you're kind of part of, how are you applying what you're sharing here? In what context, in what ways, and what are you learning from there?
We're trying to really look at ecosystem leadership from multiple ways, right? The first is at Wisdom Tree, we're building capacity for ecosystem leadership and we're articulating what it is, right? Because it is new in some ways, and it is through our articles, through our training programs, cohorts, through witty huddles. So we're first, on one end, we're starting to create this knowledge about and capacity about it. As Bodhi Sangha, we are actually trying to weave this network of ecosystem leaders. We're saying if weavers start sense making with each other, they'll create a very important membrane in the country. And they'll be able to coordinate actions on scale across. And so we need to build that Sangha. And Bodhi Sangha is actually ecosystem leaders coming with each other and sense making and so on. So we've created that container. We've also created WISE, and WISE Cities is a network across cities where this ecosystem leadership can actually be practiced, right? Where you can actually build geographical city-based ecosystems and so on. So ecosystem leaders need a context of practice which lets them do something. So the geographical and the cause-based contexts are provided by WISE. And then of course we have our base BRM where we are actually transitioning all the time from an org identity to an ecosystem. So BRM is like a daily practice. It's what grounds us in our own being to say, hey, we'll not only be BRM focused, but we'll be ecosystem focused. So that's where kind of the rubber hits the road. We have an interesting event coming up called Bell BRM Ecosystem Leadership Lab, where again to see how an ecosystem comes together, how in Mumbai there is a WISE awards and how there's a graduation of a CCF ceremony and there is a knowledge sharing on ecosystem leadership and there's a simulation and activity where young and old people come together to solve problems. So Bell, which is happening on 7th and 8th August 2026 in Mumbai, is a great place to see how ecosystem leadership comes together and what happens when you bring these seemingly disconnected pieces together. So at Bell, we are inviting different people, but when they come into the same space, these chance encounters increase, new relationships form, new possibilities emerge, right? And to see that, the best way is to not talk about it, but to experience it. And that's why Bell is a place where all of this comes together for us for now in the immediate short run.
So Bell is an invitation of 2 days, 7th and 8th August. And what is happening in the 2 days?
I mean, Bell, I would flip back that question to you otherwise, Kejal, but I'll take a crack at it and you can add. On 7th, we are meeting at CED, Center for Education Documentation, which also has been a hub for a lot of people to come together. It's in Mumbai. It's a very beautiful and sacred ancient space, Google before Google. And we're not doing this as a conference, we're doing it as an adda, because we feel ecosystem leadership should not be spoken in a conference or a panel discussion type. We should hang out our way into talking about ecosystem leadership. So a very heart to heart, intimate space, a curated space for people who are already practicing or who believe in this, right? So a small seventh evening kind of a hangout, 4 o'clock onwards. We love long hangouts. So 4 to 10, 11, 12, 7, 8 hour hangout where we talk about what is ecosystem leadership, what's coming up, where are we experiencing it, and also hang out. On 8th morning, we are visiting various projects. So there are small curated kind of visits and conversations, again, to look at how the Mumbai ecosystem is actually coming together, what are its pieces, and what's really emerging. And then the evening of 8th is a combination of the WISE Awards, which acknowledges leaders in Mumbai who are building a WISE city. It's also the graduation of our Community Connect Fellowship. So all the youngsters who have done a fellowship, and Mumbai's and India's, one of India's largest citizen surveys, that being released, that being presented, and also young people from other kind of alumni coming together. And there is a large simulation. It's a surprise, but it's a little bit about seeing ecosystem leadership in action. How can ecosystem leadership respond? So we are also trying to simulate so that people are able to mental model what ecosystem leadership will be about, right? So simulation is going to be the most memorable and fun part of it, and yeah, not to be missed.
So we're really inviting you to be there, be part of it, experience something. Some concepts and things are better experienced than really understood through verbal literature or through this concept. So we are inviting you to come join us, be part of this 2 days with us. We'll also kind of make sure that you have fun, you have time with other ecosystem viewers who are coming together also. With this part, we come back to our podcast conversation beyond the plugin. What are some final thoughts, Abhishek, that you want to share on ecosystem leadership and why it's most important in the time and age we are at?
When change happens, we want to hold on to what we know even more strongly because it gives us anchoring. And at times we become less flexible in face of change. We double down on what we already know. So it's very natural that when change happens, we're going to be even more invested in ourselves, our orgs, our beliefs, and try to push them. All of us doing that is going to create a chaos and not really letting us move forward. If we're able to release that and get beyond that to say this chain needs us to adapt, and adapt in a way that expands ourselves, expands our understanding, sense making, and just humbly acknowledging that no one person or one org can solve this, and trusting that nature and the world and the non-human world also wants to conspire with us to respond to these times. The ancestors are blessing us, the future generations are cheering us. So we're able to expand into that and reach out to each other. I think slowly a new layer will form, right? That layer is there, but it's not fully come online. It's connecting as we speak. And a new intelligence will also come up, which is relational intelligence alongside artificial intelligence, a deep relational intelligence, which is wiser and can use AI, but not be co-opted by it. So I think it's time for that to emerge. And I feel more and more convinced that if and only if that emerges, we'll prevent ourselves from becoming either a completely surveillance based society where centralized power exists, or an anarchist chaos where whoever does whatever because tech has become decentralized, right? So I feel a relational layer can regulate this crazy kind of chaos we are in. And really, it's like a new organ for humanity that needs to be formed in response to these times. And yeah, I think we all are a part of it. We're getting to be a part of it and not getting stuck with the language saying, oh, ecosystem leadership is a wisdom tree concept. We don't believe in it. We think it is trust based leadership. We think it's servant leadership 2.0. Let's go beyond language to understand the spirit of what is happening. The spirit is we need reconnection, we need trust, we need coordination. Let's do that.
Super. That was a very succinct summary. I think this summary is what we'll put it at the start of the podcast to know what this podcast is really all about. It was fun jamming. It was fun also kind of bringing out some of the nuances of the different words that we keep using. And at times, even the contrast between, is collaboration, coordination same or different? And I think this podcast has definitely been a great way to get into this conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Abhishek.
Thank you, Kejal. It was my pleasure.